Hi, my name's Ollie, and in this Politics Explained video, I'm going to go through everything you need to know about socialism in A-level politics. I'm going to start by looking at the development of socialism over time, from the emergence of socialism with revolutionary socialism, through to evolutionary socialism, social democracy, and the third way. In the middle part of the video, I'm going to look at the key agreements and principles of socialism, as well as the key tensions and disagreements within socialism between the strands. And then finally, I'm going to look at the key thinkers of socialism. The PDFs that you can see on your screen and you'll be seeing throughout the video can be found on the Politics Explained website, where you'll also find loads and loads of resources to help you in your Politics A-level, including essay plans, detailed everything you need to know guides and textbooks, as well as one thing I'm going to be bringing out in the next couple of weeks is detailed example packs from the past year for UK politics and UK government, so you can have the most up-to-date examples in your essays. You can also find a place to sign up for tutoring if that's something you'd be interested in. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. So, starting off in the first part of the video, we're going to have a look at the kind of key strands of socialism. We're going to introduce it and look at its development over time. But first, one thing we'll have a look at, which, and these kind of questions apply to all of the video, and these are questions you can get asked on socialism as a whole, are the potential essay questions. And as with liberalism and conservatism, if you've seen those videos, there's kind of three key types of questions you can get. The most likely question is, so they're all focused on to what extent do socialists agree. So they're all about kind of agreement versus disagreement within the ideology. The most likely type of question focuses on the state, economy, society, or human nature. So there's kind of four key questions, and they could be phrased differently, but the broad idea is the same. To what extent do they agree in those four key areas? The next key type of question you could get is on some of the key principles. And that's where you got here, to what extent do they agree on collectivism, common humanity, equality, social class, or workers' control, which are the key principles of socialism. And the final one you get an overall question, to what extent do socialists agree, where of course you're going to have to bring in lots of different things from state, economy, society, human nature. Or you can get, to what extent do just two particular strands agree? And those questions are potentially the most difficult ones in places. So yeah, keep those in mind as you kind of watch through the video, just to think about, okay, what kind of different points you could use. On the Politics Explained website, there are detailed essay plans for the state, society, economy, and human nature, ones for socialism, conservatism, and liberalism. And then you can really adapt those key points to answer pretty much any question, as well as the stuff in this video. And if you want the kind of PDFs with it, as I said at the start, you can find those as the kind of everything you need to know guides on the website as well. Yeah, without further ado, let's start off with the emergence of socialism. So socialism emerged in the 19th century as a response in particular to the Industrial Revolution and the consequences of the Industrial Revolution. So the Industrial Revolution and the development of capitalism created great class divisions and economic inequalities. So you saw factories springing up across Europe and also America at the time, and masses of workers faced harsh working conditions and low wages, with a widening gap between the vast majority of the population, who were the workers, the labour force, and the wealthy industrialists, the capitalist class, as Marx and Engels will see called it, who owned the factories. And early socialists, with Marx and Engels being really key, they criticised the capitalist system for its exploitation of the working class, the majority of the population, and as a result, they argued that it needed to be overthrown in favour of a completely different system that pursued equality through the redistribution of wealth and workers controlling the means of production. And that's ultimately this kind of whole idea that capital needs to be overthrown and replaced is socialism. They weren't only kind of philosophical ideas, they had a very kind of real political impact. They sought to kind of really not just kind of outline these ideas, but they sought to really promote revolution across Europe with the aim of creating such change and such a society. And their ideas ultimately spread and became popular among millions of workers in Europe and Asia, laying the foundation for political parties and movements that sought to transform society through revolution, with some of them ultimately being successful in revolution, as we'll see a bit later in the video. So that's the emergence of socialism. And the first key strand of socialism is revolutionary socialism. And Marx and Engels were crucial in first setting out this socialist thought. And they did so in some of their most kind of influential texts you may have heard of, such as Das Kapital and the Communist Manifesto. And in these works, Marx and Engels outlined what you can kind of describe as a historical materialist view of society. So they saw societal development over time as going through a number of stages of economic development. And they saw these kind of stages as inevitable. And they thought that kind of society inevitably progressed from feudalism to capitalism, and ultimately will inevitably progress through socialism to the end goal, which is a communist society. And they'll do that through a working class revolution. So they argued that inherent to capitalism was class oppression of the proletariat. So these are really key phrases you're going to want to use in your essay. So the proletariat is the working class by the bourgeoisie. So the bourgeoisie is the capitalist class. And it creates deep inequalities, capitalism does, and suppress the inherently collaborative and social nature of humans. They believe that human nature they have a very positive view of it. As we'll see, kind of believe in common humanity, working together. They believe that capitalism ultimately suppresses that as well. So they see it as inevitable that this oppression under capitalism, which they see as inherent to capitalism, would lead to the proletariat seizing control of the state and the economy in a violent revolution. And after seizing that control, the working class would and should fundamentally change society. So there'll be workers' control of society and the state and the whole of the economy, a commitment to collectivism, common humanity, and equality, rather than individualism, as promoted through capitalism. And capitalism would be completely abolished, as would the class exploitation that was inherent to it. So a lot of words there that we're going to go through in a lot more detail and explain this kind of key principle of socialism later in the video. So they believed that kind of the working class would take control and should take control in a violent revolution. And after this brief period of a dictatorship of the proletariat, where the working class are in charge of the state and there's complete workers' control, they ultimately believed that the state would wither away and the final stage of society would be reached. And this is a communist society. And in this society, they believed it would be classless, stateless, and the means of production would be communally owned by everyone. And all forms of exploitation and equality would be eliminated. As I said, this is known as communism. And I thought it'd be useful to early on in the video kind of really look at what is the difference between communism and socialism, because it is really confusing and it's ultimately not really clear as well. And they're often used interchangeably in relation to Marxist thought when analysing it. So all of the above that we've just discussed can be considered both communism and socialism. But communism specifically refers to the idea to support everything above. So in particular, that final stage of societal evolution, where they believe there's a classless, stateless society. Whereas socialism is kind of more the broader ideology pursuing the principles outlined below that we'll look at in a minute. And that includes the later socialists who don't believe potentially in a complete revolution or don't believe in that end communist society. They're still considered socialists, especially social democrats and evolutionary socialists. So key principles of socialism, just to have a quick introduction to them, are collectivism. So that's this argument that the collective action of individuals is of greater moral and practical value to society than individual effort. Very different from liberalism, as you'll notice, which really focuses on the individual. Common humanity. So this is the socialist emphasis that humans are social creatures with positive tendencies towards cooperation, sociability, and rationality. And it also includes the fact that human nature can't be understood without reference to the society in which it lives. So you can't understand humans without looking at the society that shapes them. Equality is perhaps the most important driving principle of socialism. So they argue that economic inequality is fundamentally unfair and undermines collectivism and cooperation. And as a result, the state should step in to pursue equality. Social class is really central to socialist understanding of society. So it underpins our analysis of social dynamics and historical change, as we looked at with that historical materialism. They believe that this class exploitation is inherent to capitalism, so the oppression of the proletariat by the bourgeoisie, and therefore capitalism should be abolished. Workers' control. So socialists advocate both worker control over the management of the workplace and worker control over the broader economic decision making, so over the state, which you might sometimes see described as nationalisation or common ownership. And finally, kind of fun one I've kind of added in is opposition to capitalism. So you can see that's kind of come in through the others, but I think this is really just central to understanding socialism, and to keep in mind that they're ultimately just deeply opposed to capitalism, think it would be completely removed, and think a system should be set up that is effectively opposite to capitalism in their view. As we'll see later in the video, some of the later strands of socialism don't completely support all of these principles. They don't support completely removing capitalism. They don't support complete workers' control. And that's where you can partly debate whether they should be considered socialists at all. So revolutionary socialists, for example, probably wouldn't consider the other strands socialists at all. But what you can see, and many would consider them socialists, is the evolution over time. So they'll be looking to kind of employ and kind of follow the other principles of socialism, but within a capitalist system, and not to the same extent. In the same way that you see that potentially with the evolution of thought from traditional conservatism to one nation conservatism, or from classical liberalism to modern liberalism. So, continuing with revolutionary socialism, Marx and Engels ultimately inspired revolutionary socialists across Europe and Asia. So they led to kind of working class, communist, socialist parties springing up across Europe and Asia. And they were really committed to the kind of theoretical foundations laid by Marx and Engels. They were really committed to violent working class revolutions to create equality, to create collectivism, and to create complete workers' control. Ultimately, they often adapted Marxist doctrine slightly to fit the local conditions of their own kind of unique philosophical interpretations, which led to kind of diverse versions of Marxism, each with its kind of unique approach. So Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks in Russia, which was ultimately the first communist revolution or socialist revolution, kind of emphasized that, okay, you didn't need a mass uprising of workers, but it could be done by a small vanguard of committed communists, and that was important at the time because in Russia it wasn't a completely capitalist society yet. Rosa Luxemburg, who's one of the key thinkers, was a prominent Marxist and revolutionary in Germany, and she developed a distinct interpretation of revolutionary socialism that was very consistent with Marx and Engels, but really emphasized mass strikes and the organic role of the working class in spearheading the revolution. So the role of trade unionism, striking, and collective action in doing so. And she kind of critiqued those Bolsheviks. So what you see is revolutionary socialists, Marx and Engels are very much revolutionary socialists, and they always start it. You'll see these different interpretations of revolutionary socialists from others. In terms of revolutionary socialism in practice, we can look at two key case studies, the Soviet Union and Communist China. So Marx and Engels kind of pretty much expected that the first socialist revolutions wouldn't come from the Soviet Union or China, because they ultimately weren't, at the time, capitalist societies yet. They were still very much feudal societies, with a vast majority of the population in the Soviet Union, at least serfs or kind of peasantry. It was very much still a feudal society, and that kind of went against the kind of Marx and Engels idea of the historical dialectic, where things inevitably have to go from feudal to capitalist and then to socialist. So they kind of actually expected they would be in Germany or Britain, because they were where capitalism was the most developed and the most industrialized. But ultimately that wasn't the case. They occurred in Russia and China, largely inspired driven by parties inspired by Marx and Engels' thought. So the first kind of socialist revolution was in 1917 in the Soviet Union, led by Lenin and the Bolshevik Party, as I said. And post-revolution, the Soviet government implemented wide-ranging socialist policies, including collectivization of agriculture, central planning of the economy. You see Stalin's first 5-year plan in 1928, which pursued kind of full-scale industrialization and collectivization of agriculture. And the state kind of pretty much controlled virtually all aspects of political and economic life. You see very strong states under socialism. And it's supposedly in an effort to build a communist society where class distinctions were erased. But despite these efforts, the vision of a stateless classes society remained elusive as the Soviet state grew increasingly authoritarian. You see the exact same in China. You don't ever see this progress towards this kind of stateless or classless society. You kind of effectively see it stuck at the kind of dictatorship of the proletariat with a very strong authoritarian state. In China, the Communist Revolution, led by Mao Zedong, culminated in 1949, following decades of civil conflict and resistance to Japanese occupation. And his approach kind of adapted Marxist-Leninist theory to the agrarian context of China, so still very much kind of a feudal society, so it focused heavily on the peasantry as the main force of the revolution, rather than solely the kind of urban working class, the urban proletariat. I mean, you see very similar socialist kind of policies implemented once they came into power to the Soviet Union. So They sought to fundamentally transform Chinese society. So the Agrarian Reform Law of 1950 aimed to abolish feudal land ownership and redistribute land to millions of peasants. So it's effectively that kind of complete ownership, kind of works control, I suppose, as peasantry at the time, but kind of collectivization of land. Also nationalisation of industry with the first 5-year plan of 1953. And they laid the groundwork for Mao's more radical policies, the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. So the Great Leap Forward was really focused on developing the economy, developing agriculture and industry simultaneously, and you saw communes, pooled land, pooled labour reserves, so it's real collectivisation and workers' control. And the Cultural Revolution also sought to purge the kind of remnants of the capitalist and traditional elements from Chinese society and promote Maoist ideology, and it ultimately created millions of deaths at the time as well. So it tried to sort of mobilise millions of youths in the Red Guards to challenge authority figures who they saw as kind of remnants of the old order and the capitalist class in the name of creating, supporting Maoism and communism. And as with the Soviet Union, they had great control over the state. So that's a bit of an introduction to revolutionary socialism. So as you'll see, kind of Marx and Engels are central to it in terms of starting it. And that's where really that's almost well, not in the kind of practical application, but revolutionary socialism kind of being seen as kind of pure socialism, pure kind of socialism and communism as they started. There's kind of, they thought this is how everything should be, and they're very, very principled, and nothing should change away from that. They very much didn't think you could compromise on capitalism or compromise on having no revolution. The next strands we're going to have a look at now kind of move away from that a little bit. And the first one we'll have a look at is, it's not one of the name strands, but it's really important to understand. It's evolutionary socialism or democratic socialism or revisionism. It's been called a number of things. And it's important to understand that social democrats and the third way, who are the later socialists, are these types of socialists as well. So they don't believe in revolution anymore. They believe in evolutionary methods. And this especially came in the early 20th century, when some socialists started to revise key elements of revolutionary socialism, in particular the argument that a revolution is necessary. As I said, a couple of different names they've been called. I think if you go for one, you go for evolutionary socialism. They still upheld key socialist principles. In particular, they believed in the complete abolition of capitalism, these early evolutionary socialists. But they've differed significantly in the methods to achieve these goals, ultimately believing that socialism could be achieved gradually through democratic processes and reforms, rather than through violent revolution and overthrow of the existing state. They thought you could effectively expand and take over the state. So it sought to achieve absolute equality, workers' control, and the elimination of the socialist class through incremental legislative and social reforms, therefore maintaining a commitment to the foundational goals of socialism, but rejecting the necessity of revolution. And in Britain, Beatrice Webb was really key to supporting the idea that socialism could be achieved through democracy, especially given the context after World War I, when the expansion of the franchise meant that there was now a majority of the working class in the electorate. And as a result, she advocated for a view of kind of the inevitability of gradualness. So that suggested that socialism was now inevitable in democracy, as the working class would continue to vote for socialist parties and policies until capitalism had been completely abolished, as she very much, as other socialists did, believed that socialist policies were inherently beneficial to the working class, and they would therefore inevitably vote for it. And as a result of this kind of inevitability of gradualness, revolution wasn't necessary, as it would inevitably, effectively, socialism would inevitably be brought in through democracy in a kind of evolutionary method. Some revolutionary socialists at the time strongly rejected this move to evolutionary socialism, critiquing these approaches for compromising the fundamental goals of socialism and diluting its transformative potential. And one of the thinkers, Rosa Luxemburg, was pretty central to this. So she argued that evolutionary socialism effectively abandoned the class struggle, which she considered essential for overthrowing capitalism and establishing a truly socialist society. So she believed that through gradual reform, you couldn't get rid of the kind of capitalist structures. And in fact, gradual reform would only reinforce them rather than dismantle them, which was key to socialism. Reform or Revolution was a key text where she critiqued these works, and she kind of really underscored the necessity of direct confrontation with capitalist systems by working class revolution. So that's evolutionary socialism. The next strand of socialism we're going to have a quick look at is social democracy. So social democracy emerged in the mid-20th century, especially in the post-World War II period in Britain, as a distinct strand of socialist thought, adapting to the changing political and economic landscape in the post-World War II period. So it retained a commitment to core socialist principles such as equality, common humanity, and workers' control. It sought to realise these goals within the framework of a capitalist system. And that was a big shift from revolutionary socialism that called for the complete overthrow of capitalism. So instead of completely overthrowing capitalism, they advocated for reforming it and managing it to make it more equal, and they thought this was possible. So they supported policies such as progressive taxation, an extensive welfare state to protect workers' rights and reduce economic disparities. And while they endorsed the nationalisation of certain key industries, so to some extent they still believed in workers' control, they did so within a mixed economy, with the remainder of the economy being capitalist. And they were also less absolute in their approach to equality. They didn't think that you should completely redistribute everything. They focused on equality of opportunity and only some equality of outcome. So rather than complete abolition of social class and absolute equality, they believe you can pursue equality of outcome to a certain amount through progressive taxation and redistribution of wealth from the rich to the poor, but not complete absolute equality. And this kind of pragmatic adaptation allowed social democracy to gain significant electoral success in numerous democratic nations, including in the UK. It's important to understand why it emerged. So it's partly driven by the decline of traditional industrial industries. So it believed that class under capitalism could no longer be understood as kind of complete binary oppression of the proletariat by the bourgeoisie. Instead, it was more of a complex system where new social classes like the managerial, professional, and middle classes were present, and capitalism was therefore seen as kind of no longer completely oppressive. So you see Anthony Crosland, one of the key thinkers, acknowledging this change, writing that a lot of a big proportion of the population now enjoys many of the luxuries which until recently were considered the prerogative of the rich. So he didn't see it as capitalism inevitably producing worsening and worsening inequality and the oppression of one class by the other. Also really important was the emergence of Keynesianism in the 1920s, which they believed was important to allowing capitalism to now be managed to pursue the key goals of socialism, rather than capitalism inevitably producing oppression and producing inequality. So they believed that rather than it needing to be abolished, it could be managed through fiscal and monetary policy to mitigate the booms and busts of capitalism. So you didn't have mass unemployment during economic downturns. You could effectively manage capitalism to ensure that there was full employment for the working class. And Anthony Crosland was a key figure in articulating this view, and especially in his work, The Future of Socialism. So he believed that through a mixed economy and Keynesianism, the goals of socialism could still be achieved in a capitalist system. And the redistribution of resources and the provision of extensive public services was also really important to this. Okay, and we can see this social democracy in practice in Britain in the 1960s, especially under the government of Harold Wilson. So the country embraced a mixed economy during this period, with the state controlling key sectors of the economy, including coal, railways, water, and other utilities. With these kind of industries run in the interest of the whole of society. But the remainder of the economy was capitalist, and they also implemented kind of Keynesian economics in this period to seek to kind of manage the economy, stimulate growth, manage and kind of keep down unemployment and maintain economic stability. You can see their commitment to some level of equality outcome in the fact that the top rate of earned income was 83%, and they sought to redistribute that somewhat, especially through investing in a big welfare state, public health, housing, and social security to kind of provide a safety net for all and reduce poverty in society. Their focus on equality of opportunity as well received particular focus, especially in education, with Anthony Crosland as Secretary of State for Education in the period, introducing comprehensive education, as well as increased funding for higher education to kind of try and make educational achievement accessible for all, regardless of your class. And therefore, this kind of overall illustrates how Social democracy in the 1960s in Britain sought to combine socialist ideals with capitalist economics, striving for a society that was both dynamic and fair, and where the harsher effects of capitalism were softened by state intervention. This move to social democracy was fundamentally rejected by some socialists, viewing it as a compromise that really betrayed the core principles of socialism and shouldn't be considered socialism at all. And they argued that by accommodating capitalism to a certain extent, it failed to address the inherent class exploitations of it and inequality within the capitalist system, such as the unequal distribution of wealth and the power dynamics that favoured the elite. And they believe that kind of social democracy kind of only softened the edges of capitalism rather than actually challenging the inherent class exploitation and properly pursuing equality. And this kind of key ideological rift became really evident in the 1980s in the Labour Party in Britain, especially with Michael Foot representing the more left-wing elements of the party, where he aimed to shift Labour back to its more traditional socialist roots. So, and you see a very radical manifesto published that proposed renationalising key industries that had been privatised, abolishing the House of Lords, exiting the European Economic Community, and these kind of really contrasted with the centrist market-friendly direction that had been emerging under previous Labour leaders. So Foot's approach was a clear rejection of the notion that socialism could coexist with capitalist structures, showing his kind of belief in a more profound transformation of society. The final key strand we're going to have a look at is the third way, which emerged in the late 20th century, supporting a middle way between laissez-faire capitalism and social democracy, where privatisation and the free market were accepted, but the state was used to mitigate the worst effects of capitalism and promote equality of opportunity for all. And this was driven by a changing global economy, and advocates of the third way argued that globalisation and modernisation in the economy meant that free market capitalism was the best system for promoting economic growth. So they no longer believed in nationalisation or workers' control at all. So the state could no longer seek to control the market. Instead, it should seek to promote left-wing principles within it and prevent its worst effects. So you see that's kind of a move away from commitment to Keynesianism that social democracy has to support for free market capitalism. So you see a big move away from socialist beliefs, so no longer supporting workers' control, collectivism, no longer having a focus on social class exploitation at all, redistribution, or and focused on equality of opportunity rather than equality of outcome. And there was also not an opposition to capitalism. Instead, it was a kind of a real embrace of capitalism. However, they did focus on equality somewhat, as they focused on equality of opportunity in particular through education rather than equality of outcome. He didn't reject the state playing no role at all, though, in the same way that kind of neoliberals or the New Right did. Instead, they supported a strong but reformed welfare state that was aimed to kind of help individuals succeed in the economy, promote social mobility, and provide a safety net, rather than being used to kind of redistribute wealth, though, which social democrats believed in a little bit more. And you see Anthony Giddens was a really key thinker in this, and he argued that this new societal changes and the new global economy required this reimagining of social democracy that balanced individual autonomy with a supportive role for the state and supporting this kind of radical centre approach. Socialists almost all socialists fundamentally reject the third way, arguing that it represents a rejection of the core principles of socialism almost entirely and should definitely not be classified as socialism at all. They argue that the third way's embrace of capitalism and its focus on economic efficiency undermine the socialist commitment to challenging capitalist class oppression and prioritising worker control and economic equality. So by promoting privatisation and reducing the scope of direct state intervention in the economy, the third way dilutes the efforts to redistribute wealth from the capitalist class to the working class. And they believe that the kind of focus on equality of opportunity rather than outcome fails to address the inherent inequalities produced by capitalism. And this critique is grounded in the view that socialism entails not just reforming capitalism to make it more humane, but fundamentally transforming the economic system, and that's what socialism should be. In terms of the third way in practice, the key place to look is New Labour under Blair in particular, and you see kind of an embrace of free market capitalism and a move away from traditional socialist and social democratic principles. So the maintenance of a 40% top rate of income tax is very different to the 83% under social democracy. It's a real departure from kind of redistributing wealth and high taxation. on the rich to pursue equality of outcome. So they're kind of very comfortable ultimately with wealth accumulation, as we'll look at kind of later in the video. Strongly advocated for privatization, so key move away from nationalization and workers' control, as seen through private finance initiatives. And they kind of really moved away from heavy interference in the market as well, so move away from Keynesianism as well. They sought to promote equality of opportunity and fairness. This way, in a way, they can be seen as socialists in some way because there's a real pursuit of equality, even if it's not equality of outcome. And you see that through the emphasis on education and the introduction of the national minimum wage. However, they also really sought to reduce the role and influence of the trade unions, which you see in the Labour Party in the period where they become just a lot less important, and that shows this move away from collectivism as well. Okay, so what we're going to have a look at now is the key principles and agreements of socialism, and then within those we're going to look at the key tensions and disagreements between the strands. So we're going to look at collectivism, common humanity, equality, social class, workers' control, and then finally we're going to also look at opposition to capitalism. So starting off with collectivism, which is the belief that collective action of individuals is of greater moral and practical value to society than individual effort. And it's a foundational principle of socialism. So they believe that morally they kind of advocate for collectivism based on the belief that the needs and well-being of the community and the whole of society should take precedence over individual interests. It's not just a philosophical stance, but also reflects a conviction about the inherent nature of humans. They believe that it is natural for humans to be sociable and cooperative beings. And it embodies the idea that kind of fraternity. So fraternity is another kind of key kind of idea of socialism, which kind of emphasizes the importance of mutual aid, shared responsibilities, and communal bonds between members of society. And it kind of asserts that humans are at their best and most fulfilled when working collaboratively for the common good. So this is kind of a really key difference from liberalism as well, which kind of really emphasizes the individual. Socialism really moves away from that with collectivism in emphasizing the whole and the idea that the kind of society as a whole and the whole of the community is more important than any individual, and that society should work together in order to kind of help everyone in the community. So practically, they also argue that it's the most efficient way to harness and distribute society's resources. So if you pool everyone's resources and efforts together, it's seen as the means to ensure that the kind of capabilities and assets of each individual are effectively utilised, and then it's kind of distributed effectively to everyone based on need. And this contributes to the critique of capitalism, where they see resources and wealth as concentrated in the hands of a few rather than spread across the whole of society. So the socialist support for trade unionism is a clear manifestation of this collectivist principle, because they're kind of really seen as key for empowering workers collectively. So workers come together and bargain for much better distribution of resources and wages for them all. And it's kind of a practical example of how this combined strength of a group can achieve beneficial outcomes for all of its members. And ultimately, the commitment to collectivism leads to a natural support for a larger state. So they believe that a strong, active state can coordinate this kind of large-scale economic and social policies to kind of distribute wealth to everyone, manage public services, and ultimately manage the economy effectively. So you see significant state involvement in healthcare, education, and social security, underpinned by the belief that these services should be provided collectively as rights available to all citizens rather than kind of purchased individually in the market. So it's not just a moral stance, but they also see it as kind of practically, they see it's practically rational, a kind of collectivist approach to the state and the economy, and a guiding principle for how the economy should be managed. In terms of the different strands of socialism, so revolutionary socialists believe in communist kind of complete collectivism and the eradication of capitalism. Complete collectivism. So they believe that all means of production should be collectively owned, eliminating private property and therefore eliminating capitalism as a whole. And they believe that this radical kind of restructuring of the economy is the only path to achieving their kind of communist end goal of a classless and stateless society. And in this kind of end society, there is no class division, and the kind of state has also been dissolved. It's kind of so that they believe that the community collectively owns all resources and distributes them equally. And this end goal of collectivism and communism as a whole. So it extends beyond mere economic reform. It also sees kind of collectivism as revolutionary socialists also see collectivism as really important to achieving socialism in the first place through the importance of class struggle to abolish class oppression. So they see kind of collective action by the proletariat, by the working class, as the only way that society can be transformed and capitalism can be removed. As I spoke about earlier in the video, Luxemburg really emphasizes this. She sees kind of mass action, mass strike action, worker solidarity and trade unionism as really important to achieving socialism through a revolution. And the communist regimes of Russia and China are kind of key historical examples of collectivism implemented by revolutionary socialists. So they both kind of collectivized agriculture and the economy in particular to seek to guarantee a fairer distribution of resources. In contrast to revolutionary socialists, social democrats don't believe in complete collectivism, but they do believe in pursuing collectivism within capitalism. So they believe that capitalism definitely shouldn't be completely left alone, as that will produce kind of great inequality and instability. But they think that the state should intervene in the economy to pursue collectivism through the redistribution of wealth, providing comprehensive welfare services, through Keynesian economic management to prevent mass unemployment. And crucially, they also support a mixed economy. So they support nationalisation of key industries that should be run in the interests of everyone, rather than run in the interest of profit, such as, so you see in the post-World War II period in Britain, the nationalisation of coal, steel, railways, healthcare, and other industries. And crucially, they're also strong supporters of trade unionism, which is a key element of their collectivist approach. So they see trade unions as essential in empowering workers and giving them a collective voice to negotiate better working conditions within the capitalist economy. The third way, by contrast, rejects collectivism. So they move away and focus instead on individual opportunity and equality of opportunity. So they kind of place a lot less emphasis on the state's role in managing the economy for the collective, for the whole of society, and they instead kind of emphasize empowering individuals within the market economy. And this is based on kind of the fact that Giddens believed that kind of you should focus on, in a really competitive, globalized modern economy of capitalism, people needed to be supported in order to compete. So you see Blair, this kind of rejection of collectivism you can see in Blair's government, who reduced the role of trade unions within the party and within the economy. And they also didn't pursue nationalisation and therefore kind of the collective owning of industries in order to run in the interests of all of society. Instead, continuing the privatisation of Thatcher and even pursuing some more privatisation in the period. The next key principle of socialism is common humanity, which emphasises that humans are social creatures with positive tendencies towards cooperation, sociability, and rationality. And it also brings in the idea that human nature can't be understood without kind of in reference to the society in which it acts. And you see this in Marx's writing, where he wrote, "The human essence is no abstraction inherent in each single individual. In its reality, it is the ensemble of the social relations." So that kind of shows that their views on human nature see it as inherently connected to the whole of society, rather than kind of being an inherent human nature irrespective of the societal conditions in which it's acting. And this is really pivotal in shaping the socialist beliefs in the possibility and necessity of societal change, as they believe that as human nature is shaped by the society in which it's in, they believe that the negative aspects of human nature under capitalism are due to capitalism, and therefore by removing capitalism, you can have the development of what they see as the inherent nature of humans as kind of social, cooperative beings under a socialist system. So we'll have a quick look at each of these kind of parts of common humanity. So they have a very optimistic understanding of human nature, that contrasts the kind of liberal emphasis on self-interest and competition. So they see people as inherently cooperative, social, and rational. And they see humans not just as driven by material self-improvement, but they also believe that humans kind of are motivated by improving society as a whole and collectivism as well. And you see this kind of in their kind of socialist emphasis on fraternity, kind of the strength of communal bonds and collective action between workers and between different members of society. Crucially, they also emphasize the malleability of human nature. So they argue that human nature isn't static. Instead, it's malleable and is very much shaped by the societal and economic systems in which people live. So the kind of competitive and aggressive behaviors encouraged by capitalism aren't the expressions of true human nature. Instead, they're the response to the capitalist environment. Therefore, by removing capitalism, by altering the societal structures, you can release this more positive aspect of human nature, which they believe is kind of true human nature under a socialist system. Let's have a quick look now at the kind of common humanity in the strands of socialism. So all strands kind of support common humanity, but a key difference occurs in what to do about it and the importance of capitalism to it. So revolutionary socialist view of human nature is deeply influenced by common humanity. They see humans as inherently cooperative and communal, but argue that capitalism distorts this. So Marx argued that capitalism distorts and suppresses the natural positive tendencies of human nature. And under capitalism, it's kind of twisted into a competitive, selfish behaviours. And this crucially also leads to a false consciousness, where the proletariat, working class, is misguided to accept the capitalist system as just and natural, despite it being against their collective interest. And you see Luxemburg, another revolutionary socialist, essentially emphasising how kind of capitalism divides workers and communities, turning them against each other in a constant battle for economic survival. So capitalism for revolutionary socialists is therefore viewed as the central problem in realising true human nature and this kind of true positive cooperative version of human nature, and the kind of collective cooperative spirit of humanity. And they therefore believe that the capitalist system should be completely kind of abolished in favour of a communist system of kind of cooperation, communal living, where the kind of true positive nature of humans, cooperative nature of humans can flourish. Social democrats share the belief in a common humanity and the intrinsic positive nature of humans, but their approach to realising this potential within society differs. So they recognise the kind of challenges and inequalities of capitalism, but they don't advocate for its complete abolition. Instead, they focus on reforming and humanising the capitalist system. They argue that the negative aspects of capitalism, such as income inequality, exploitation, and social division, can be mitigated through managing capitalism through Keynesianism, a mixed economy, and extensive social welfare programs. And therefore, they believe that this kind of positive common humanity can be achieved within a capitalist framework through kind of crucially tempering the excesses of capitalism and pursuing equality and the principles of socialism within the capitalist system. The third way also maintains a very positive view of human nature, recognising the kind of potential for sociability and communality and people working together. But crucially, for the third way, this is also combined with an emphasis on individualism and allowing individuals to reach their potential in a market economy, which potentially sees a bit of a liberal influence in their view. So unlike revolutionary or socialists or social democrats, they don't view capitalism as a fundamental problem. Instead, they advocate for a balance, believing that a market economy can coexist with social welfare and community, and that cooperation can thrive in this environment. They don't seek radical overhaul of the economy or even much intervention in capitalism as social democrats do, because they don't see it as fundamentally flawed. If social democrats do see capitalism as flawed, they just believe it can be managed. So they in this context, they don't see the capitalist system as flawed. They kind of focus on empowering people within the system to succeed under capitalism. And the aim is to kind of cultivate a society where individual aspirations and communal well-being are not mutually exclusive, but they can kind of be complementary. Okay, so perhaps the most important principle of socialism is equality. So they argue that economic inequality is fundamentally unfair and undermines collectivism and cooperation, and therefore the state should step in to pursue equality. And this fundamentally rejects liberal thought, which justifies economic disparities as a natural kind of consequence of differences in individuals' kind of ability, effort, or choices. They argue that such inequalities are not just unjust, but a product of the structural inequalities of capitalist systems. And they kind of argue that actually this kind of person's success, their different socioeconomic status, is determined by luck and their class rather than their inherent abilities or efforts. And as a result, they advocate for redistributive policies to kind of level the economic playing field and ensure equality for all. And it's not just a matter of fairness. It's also seen as essential for kind of creating kind of a sense of collectivism and the natural common humanity. So kind of they believe that these kind of, when you have inequality, which you have under a capitalist system, it inevitably leads to social and class conflict, which impedes the development of this kind of development of society to work together and cooperate. So kind of reducing inequalities is not just about fairness, it's also about kind of improving society and creating a harmonious society where everyone can work together. And the vision of this more kind of equitable society aligns with the ideal of common ownership and of the means of production, where wealth is generated by the community, is kind of shared by society as a whole among all its members, fostering a sense of solidarity and communal well-being. And they believe that common private property and capitalism creates inequality and social conflict and should therefore be removed. So the different strands of socialism crucially have different interpretations of equality. So revolutionary socialism believes in absolute equality. So this extends beyond the mere kind of equality of opportunity to encompass complete equality of outcome. So the kind of complete eradication of all forms of class distinction and inequalities in wealth and power. And Marx and Engels and revolutionary socialists believe this can only be done by overthrowing the capitalist system, as the capitalist system inherently produces these inequalities. So they believe that to do so, there should be complete collective ownership of the means of production, thereby dismantling the class structure that underlies societal inequalities. So this is not just reforming existing structures, but radically transforming them through revolutionary means. And the end goal is a completely classless, stateless society, a communist society, where you have absolute equality because resources and power are distributed equally between all members of society. And there's a really key quote from Marx that encapsulates this, saying, "From each according to his ability, to each according to his needs." So in society, everyone should contribute based on their ability to contribute to society and generate resources for everyone, but then it should be distributed equally based on need. And that's where you see that commitment to absolute equality. Okay, so social democrats reject revolutionary socialist calls for absolute equality and the complete abolition of capitalism. And instead of this kind of radical overhaul of the existing economic system, they seek to promote equality within the capitalist system. So they seek to kind of first promote equality of opportunity and also some equality of outcome, but not absolute equality. So they kind of see absolute equality as impractical and advocate for a more balanced approach that recognises that capitalism can be managed and equality can be pursued within the capitalist system. So firstly, they champion equality of opportunity, believing that everyone should have a fair chance to succeed in life regardless of their socioeconomic background. They support policies that aim to level the playing field and provide equal opportunities to everyone. So Anthony Crosland, who's one of the key thinkers, when he's Secretary of State for Education, introduces comprehensive education, which kind of aims to provide education, a similar quality of education, irrespective of socioeconomic background, intellect, or ability. And they also pursue equality of opportunity by seeking to ensure that all citizens have access to a basic level of welfare, so a strong safety net, so that it kind of meets the needs of every individual to mitigate the harsher aspects of capitalism. And crucially, they don't just support equality of opportunity, like we'll explore the third way does. They also pursue a certain degree of equality of outcome, though not absolute equality in the way of revolutionary socialists. And that's pursued through progressive taxation and other redistributive policies, where the wealthier segments of society contribute proportionally more to fund public services and welfare programs. And crucially, this can be seen under Harold Wilson's Labour governments in the 1970s, where the top rate of income tax on earned income reached 83%. And this kind of reflects a belief, a social democrat belief, and a socialist belief that the state should play a key role in reducing economic disparities and ensuring a decent standing of living for all. The third way moves even further away from revolutionary socialism. Not only do they kind of support equality of opportunity, they also completely reject equality of outcome. So they kind of firmly oppose it and instead only support equality of opportunity, which differs from social democrats. So opponents of the third way, like Blair and Clinton, were much more comfortable with the idea of individuals becoming wealthy. And this is a big shift from socialist attitudes, which opposed and sought to redistribute wealth. This acceptance of wealth creation was undermined by a belief that as long as everyone had equal opportunities to succeed as pursuit of equality of opportunity, disparities in outcome were acceptable and even desirable. as they were seen as a reflection of individual talent and effort. So the top rate of income tax under Blair was 40%, much, much lower than under social democracy. The third way did maintain this kind of social democratic commitment to equality of opportunity and heavily focused on education as a key vehicle to achieving this. And kind of this was paired with a strong but reformed welfare state, not to redistribute wealth like under social democracy, but to kind of provide a safety net and support mobility in the economy so that people could succeed in the economy. And crucially, this was kind of linked into their belief that capitalism isn't a fundamentally flawed economic system that required radical overhaul. Instead, they saw the market economy as an effective means for generating wealth and promoting efficiency in the economy. The next key principle of socialism we're going to have a look at is social class, which is central to socialist understanding of society. And for socialists, class is primarily defined by your relationship to the means of production. So if you own the means of production, you're in the capitalist class or the bourgeoisie, or if you work for them and don't own the means of production, you're in the working class or the proletariat. And socialists argue that class conflict, stemming from the inherent opposition of interest between these two groups, is the driving force of societal change, and ultimately results in revolution by the proletariat and the removal of capitalism. Socialists focus on representing and empowering the working class, the proletariat, who they see as the key agents of revolutionary change. So their ultimate goal is to create a class of society achieved through collective ownership of the means of production, therefore abolishing the capitalist conditions that give rise to social class distinctions. And the eradication of class divisions is not just seen as an economic imperative, but as a moral one, central to the creation of a just and equitable society. So they kind of through kind of the transformative revolutionary process, they aspire not only to uplift the proletariat and enable them to overthrow the bourgeoisie, but ultimately to reach a stage where class as a social division no longer exists. So they think that social class is kind of inherent to capitalism, and by removing capitalism completely, you can effectively create a classless society. So revolutionary socialists view social class within the capitalist system in binary terms. So they believe that you have two groups, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, and the bourgeoisie completely oppress the proletariat, and there's effectively nothing in between, and they see this as inherent to the capitalist system. And as a result, they seek to kind of aid the working class in achieving class consciousness, which is kind of awareness of their collective identity and their shared interest in opposition to the bourgeoisie. And in doing so, they believe that they have to overcome false consciousness, which is why the working class kind of doesn't recognize this exploitation because of capitalist ideology and kind of effectively supports capitalism. They believe that this needs to be overcome this false consciousness, help the working class achieve class consciousness so that there can then be a working class revolution and the overthrow of capitalism. And they're not just kind of theoretical kind of socialist thinkers. They kind of seek to kind of actively promote this revolution. And that's kind of one of the key quotes of Marx is the proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Working men of all countries unite. And revolutionary socialists like Rosa Luxemburg in particular emphasised the role of trade unionism and other forms of working class organisation in overcoming false consciousness and fostering a true class consciousness and awareness that the proletariat are exploited by the bourgeoisie. So Luxemburg believed that through trade union struggles and political activism, the working class will become increasingly aware of their collective power and the injustices of the capitalist system, and that's crucial in rallying the working classes towards revolution and the overthrow of the bourgeoisie. And they ultimately, revolutionary socialists, argued that class conflict was therefore inherent to capitalism and embedded in the state, which directly served the interests of the bourgeoisie. And therefore, the existing state needs to be completely overthrown and capitalism completely removed to kind of pursue a classless society. Also really important to understanding the kind of revolutionary socialist view of class is Marx and Engels' dialectic, which is this view of historical materialism. And that's kind of this view that they see society as a history of class struggle, where the oppressor or oppressed and oppressor are in constant opposition, and they kind of fight a continuous battle until ultimately the oppressed overcomes the oppressor and there's a new form of society. And they believe that these kind of class struggles are inevitable and driven by material conditions. And this is the idea of dialectical change, of kind of dialectic is the idea of kind of two groups ultimately battling to cause ultimate change in society. They believe that the emerging class will always eventually develop and challenge the dominance of the existing class, which will then lead to a new society and fundamental changes in society. So they believe it starts with feudalism, where the two classes are landowners and serfs or slaves, and eventually the seeds of capitalism sprout a new class, which is the bourgeoisie, who eventually emerge and overcome the feudal class and become dominant. You then have this capitalist system where the bourgeoisie dominates and exploits the proletariat, and the proletariat becomes increasingly exploited, and their conditions are worse and worse. But they also, as a result, increasingly achieve class consciousness. And this inevitably then leads to an uprising both by the proletariat in a violent revolution which overthrows the capitalist system and state. And the kind of end goal of this kind of historical materialism, Marxist dialectic, is communism, where they believe that once you have working class control of the state, it eventually withers away, and you have a communist society established, which is completely classless and stateless. So, going on now to the social democratic view of class, and ultimately they have a less binary view of class division. So, unlike revolutionary socialists, they don't see societies defined in kind of binary terms between the proletariat being oppressed completely by the bourgeoisie. Instead, they see it, especially in the period when they're writing in the kind of mid-20th century, as a more complex system, including the rise of new social classes like the managerial and professional classes. And this reflects changes in modern capitalist societies by the 1960s, driven by the decline of traditional industries and class structures becoming more complex and less rigid. And Anthony Crosland, a kind of key thinker for social democracy, kind of explained this when he said that a high proportion of the population now enjoy many of the luxuries which were until then considered the prerogative of the rich, and the ordinary worker lives at what even 2 decades ago would have been considered a middle class standard of life. So they see kind of this development in society where you can no longer see kind of worsening class conditions for the working class, and the rich getting richer and richer. Therefore, it's kind of more complex class system, and as a result, they don't seek to completely abolish class distinctions. They focus on creating more equal society within the capitalist framework, to ensure that one's class background doesn't dictate their opportunities and outcomes in life. And through that, or to kind of promote that, you see the kind of real promotion of equality of opportunity in society through comprehensive education. But they do also advocate for a certain degree of redistribution through kind of progressive taxation and welfare policies that distribute wealth from the richer to the poorer, to therefore still pursue some level of equality of outcome. The third way, kind of move even further away from this binary view of kind of class oppression held by revolutionary socialists, and focus instead on individual empowerment and equality of opportunity rather than class conflict. So they kind of shift significantly away from the traditional socialist emphasis on class and promoted the interests of the working class, instead kind of seeking to transcend class divisions and focusing on the individual and individual empowerment and creation of opportunity and equality of opportunity irrespective of class background. And this is grounded in belief that in the kind of increasingly globalized and modernized society, the old ideas of classes struggle are no longer relevant, and we instead need to focus on empowering individuals. So instead of focusing on kind of class oppression, Giddens believed that kind of the focus should be shifted to fostering a sense of community and shared future for all members of society. And he argued that the kind of class distinctions of the past are no longer relevant, and actually other divisions are more important, such as gender, ethnicity, and age, which also play important roles in societal stratification. So you can't just simply understand society as fundamentally based on class oppression anymore. So social policies under the third way were kind of reoriented to enhancing individual skills and employability, moving away from traditional welfare models to encouraging self-reliance and personal responsibility. And they kind of this linked into the kind of general third way view that there was a kind of a reimagining of social democracy that kind of balanced individual autonomy with supportive role for the state was necessary, and that's kind of effectively a middle way they advocated for between social democracy and free market capitalism. The next key principle of socialism we're going to have a look at is workers' control, which is really central to socialist thought, encompassing both worker control and management over the workplace and the economy, but also the whole of the state and economic decision making. So socialists advocate for transferring control over businesses and the economy from the exploitative capitalist class to the workers themselves, empowering them to make decisions about their work environment, production process, and the distribution of profits. And they see this as pivotal to removing the exploitation of capitalism in favour of an economy and distribution of resources that's in the interest of all in society. So kind of a collectivist economy. And this extends beyond just worker control of the workplace to include workers' control over the state, which we can call common ownership or nationalisation, so that it runs in line with the needs and interests of the working class and the whole of society. And this, kind of, as I mentioned, is linked to the principle of collectivism, that the economy should be controlled by the state so that it can be run in the interest of the whole of society. In revolutionary socialism, worker control is kind of envisaged as part of a revolutionary process, where they advocate for the proletariat to actively overthrow the capitalist state and seize control of the means of production. But the later strands, as I'll kind of explore in a bit, they differ significantly on how workers' control should be achieved, the necessity of revolution, and the extent to which it should be implemented. So, revolutionary socialists believe in complete workers' control of the economy and state through revolution. They argue that the existing capitalist state is designed to serve the interests of the bourgeoisie rather than the proletariat. And all of the state's kind of institutions, laws, and structure are designed to enhance the interests of the bourgeoisie rather than the whole of society and the working class. And as a result, the state needs to be completely removed and replaced in a revolution. The existing liberal capitalist state needs to be removed rather than being reformed through gradual evolution, which they believe effectively isn't possible to completely. If you want to completely remove capitalism, completely remove exploitation and inequality, you need to get rid of the existing state. And they believe that this kind of revolution has to come from the working class, and they think it's really necessary to replace it with a society that is run in the interests of everyone. And in this new state, the proletariat not only holds political power, but also control of the means of production, thereby directly addressing and rectifying the economic disparities inherent to capitalism. So there's a kind of collectivist approach to state management, where resources are kind of collectively controlled through nationalisation, common ownership, complete workers' control, and distributed equally according to the needs of the population, so that absolute equality is pursued. And what you see kind of here is a number of different ways in which revolutionary socialists believe in this revolution. So Marx and Engels see kind of this revolution as inevitable based on kind of historical change, and they see it as a kind of violent mass uprising of the working class. And they believe that this kind of leads to an establishment of the dictatorship of the proletariat at first, but then eventually the withering away of the state into a communist society. Lenin moves away from this idea of a kind of mass uprising and kind of advocates for the concept of a revolutionary vanguard. So you don't need a mass uprising in the working class. Instead, you could have a kind of tightly organized group of the most politically advanced sections of the proletariat, of the working class, and communists and intellectual allies as well, even those who are from the bourgeoisie. And this kind of small group could lead a revolution and create a communist society rather than it needing to be the working class as a whole. And this is especially significant in Russia because there wasn't a big working class at the time. It was still a largely feudal society. Rosa Luxemburg almost rejected this kind of Leninist view and went back to Marx and Engels' kind of emphasis on mass mass action by the working class to create revolution. And she really focused on kind of the importance of trade unionism, the importance of strikes, political demonstrations, as really important to creating class consciousness among the workers and effectively fundamentally transforming society. She believed it needed to be done through this mass uprising of the working class rather than through a revolutionary vanguard. In contrast to revolutionary socialism, you have evolutionary or democratic socialism that believes that socialism can be achieved gradually through democratic and parliamentary means rather than the revolutionary overthrow of the state. This school of thought argues that the state, rather than being inherently biased in favour of the capitalist class, as revolutionary socialists argue, they argue that it can be expanded and utilised to gradually transition to socialism. And Beatrice Webb especially supported this in the wake of World War One, where there was now a majority of working class men in the electorate. So she believed that in this context, it was inevitable that they would eventually advocate for full socialism. And this, she called this kind of the inevitability of gradualness. So she thought it was inevitable because working class would naturally support socialist parties because it was directly in their interests, and they'd continue electing them until complete socialism had been achieved and there was complete workers' control of the state. And Webb really admired the Soviet Union for its model of complete state control of the economy, and she really focused there's a bit more of a kind of elitist view in focus on that it should be managed by experienced and enlightened technocrats, and she kind of saw that as really really important, as important to kind of pursuing absolute equality and collectivism. You need really skilled managers of the economy, and in her view, they didn't necessarily have to come from the working class. So it's a little bit more of an elitist view. But her key view that you want to bring into the essays is the inevitability of gradualness and the idea of evolutionary socialism. So social democrats agree with this kind of evolutionary socialism, but in terms of the kind of extent of workers' control of the state, they don't advocate for complete workers' control of the economy and the state as revolutionary socialists do. Instead, they advocate for workers' control to an extent. So they support the nationalisation and common ownership of key industries, so workers' control, such as utilities, transportation and healthcare, and they believe that these kind of industries are crucial to public welfare and should therefore be run in the interests of everyone in the working class rather than for profit. However, they believe in a mixed economy, and they believe that this kind of nationalisation of key industries should be combined with capitalism in the remainder of the economy. And Anthony Crosland set out this balanced approach could achieve social justice and equality of opportunity without the need for the total overthrow of the capitalist system, because he believed that capitalism can now be managed to prevent and its kind of key inequalities and worse effects be prevented rather than needing to completely overthrow it. Social democrats also didn't advocate for workers' control of factories in the remainder of the economy. Instead, they preserved a significant role for capitalism, believing it could be controlled to pursue socialist principles. But to balance the kind of inequalities inherent in capitalism, they supported or strongly supported trade unionism and collective bargaining to kind of empower workers within the capitalist system, enabling them to kind of negotiate for better wages, safer working conditions, and more secure employment. The third way, by contrast, completely rejects workers' control, shifting from a focus on collective action and the interests of the working class through trade unions. They instead just promote individual responsibility and free market capitalism, so no state control of the economy. And New Labour also kind of under Blair reduces the power of trade unions in the party's decision making, so it isn't really supporting workers' control in the wider economy, let alone in the state. So they believe, instead of nationalisation of key industries, they believe in privatisations. They believe it's kind of the most effective method to kind of respond to market conditions and to promote the interests of society rather than state-run industries. And you see this in Blair's commitment and pursuit of privatisation when in power with private finance initiatives. And of course, as with social democrats, the third way supports evolutionary socialism rather than revolution. The final kind of key principle we're going to have a look at, and we've kind of obviously touched on this a lot so far, and I've kind of added, is the opposition to capitalism. This is really key to understanding socialism. So they kind of fundamental to the socialist ideology, as you kind of would have seen throughout the video, is opposition to capitalism and the belief that it's a fundamentally flawed system. So they see it as inherently exploitative and a system where the profit motive and private ownership of the means of production lead to stark class inequalities and class divisions. So they argue that capitalism not only creates a big gap between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, but also undermines common humanity, the natural cooperative and social nature of humans. So it results in the exploitation of workers who are paid less for the value of their labour, whilst the capitalists accumulate wealth generated from this labour, and this is seen as a root cause of systemic problems in society, including poverty, class oppression, inequality, and a lack of social justice. But as kind of we'll demonstrate now, there are significant differences among the socialist strands in terms of their response to capitalism. So revolutionary socialists support the complete removal of capitalism. So they see it as kind of the fundamentally flawed and the root of all evil and all problems in society and human nature. and therefore it needs to be completely removed. So as we've kind of gone through, they see it as kind of defined by the complete exploitation of the proletariat by the bourgeoisie, and it kind of goes against the kind of values of common humanity and collectivism. Therefore, it needs to be, to kind of properly pursue socialism and socialist principles, it needs to be overthrown rather than just being altered. It needs to be replaced with a socialist system where the means of production are collectively owned and resources are distributed according to need, and absolute equality is pursued. And the goal at the end of the day is to create a classless society where the principles of equality, solidarity, and collective welfare are paramount. And that's a radical departure from capitalist principles, seeking not just to reform or kind of regulate the existing system, but to replace it entirely. Social democrats, as we've kind of gone through a little bit before, don't believe in completely removing capitalism, they believe in managing capitalism. So they ultimately recognise its flaws, particularly the fact that it creates inequality, and argue that left unchecked, without doubt, it creates inequality in wealth and power, and undermines social cohesion and fairness. But they believe that it can be managed to pursue the key socialist goal of equality, and key to this is Keynesianism. They believe that in a Keynesian kind of given Keynesianism, economic management, that within the capitalist system, full employment can be guaranteed, and kind of real booms of bust of capitalism can be promoted, so that the state can, in a kind of stable environment, pursue equality. And to do this, they support a mixed economy where key industries are nationalised and there's significant spending on welfare, but the remainder of the economy is capitalist. So they kind of aim to kind of combine the efficiency and innovation of the market with state intervention of key industries that are run in the interest of everyone. And seeking to guarantee full employment and universal social welfare are also key. And you see kind of universal social welfare programs where services are provided available to all citizens, regardless of their income and social status, so that there's kind of a basic standard of living provided to everyone, are really key to the kind of social democratic ideas. And to do this, they support some equality of outcome and redistribution through progressive taxation. The third way go much further than social democrats in moving away from revolutionary socialism. Not only do they accept some version of capitalism, the idea that capitalism can be managed, they actually support free market capitalism, believing that it's kind of the most the privatization and free market capitalism is the best economy to promote growth in the late 20th and early 20th century. So they reject Keynesianism, believe that it interferes with the effectiveness of the market, and believe that privatization is the best way to kind of run industries. And they also didn't support high taxation rates for earners in order to redistribute and pursue equality of outcome. Instead, they're comfortable with certain members of society getting rich and only support equality of opportunity. It didn't completely abandon all socialist principles and aims, however, even if the means were much less radical. So they do believe that the state should step in to support equality of opportunity, for example, through education, and providing some level of basic safety net so that people can succeed in the free market economy. And crucially, Blair's government is a really good example of the third way's economic approach. So you see the lack of commitment to equality of outcome can be seen in their maintenance of a 40% top rate of income tax, which kind of really differs from the 83% you see under Harold Wilson's social democratic government in the 1960s. You see the commitment to privatisation, including through private finance initiatives. And you see the kind of introduction of national minimum wage and the expansion of access to higher education that really displays their commitment to equality of opportunity. What we're going to have a look at now, after looking at all of these principles, is kind of the state, economy, society, and human nature, and the kind of key agreements and disagreements in each. In terms of the state, the key agreements are that the state should intervene in the economy to promote equality and tackle the failures of capitalism. But there are a lot of key tensions and disagreements, so the extent of a worker's control of the state, the extent to which the state should intervene in the economy, and whether collectivism should be pursued, and crucially whether the capitalist state should be overthrown in a revolution or expanded through evolutionary socialism. In terms of the economy, there's agreement that capitalism is a flawed economic system that produces inequality and class divisions, and that the economy should be restructured to pursue equality. But the kind of key tensions and disagreements are whether capitalism should be completely eradicated, managed, or accepted, the extent to which workers' control of the economy and collectivism should be promoted, and what kind of equality should be promoted. So the absolute equality of revolutionary socialists versus equality of opportunity, and some pursuit of equality of outcome of social democrats versus just equality of opportunity for the third way. In terms of society, kind of key agreements and principles that society should be restructured to pursue equality, and that capitalism creates class divisions. The key tension disagreements are whether collectivism and workers' control within society should be promoted, what kind of equality should be promoted, and whether class exploitation and oppression are inherent to society under capitalism, and the exact shape of this class division. So is it kind of binary oppression of the proletariat by the bourgeoisie, or is it a bit more complex, as you see social democrats in particular argue? In terms of human nature, the key agreements are support for common humanity, both the idea that humans are inherently cooperative, sociable, and rational, as well as the belief in the malleability of human nature. And the key tension disagreements are whether this common humanity can be realised within capitalism, and the extent to which individuals can progress within capitalism, and the class division in society, including whether revolution and communism are necessary to realise the innate positive nature of humanity, or whether it can be done within capitalism. And then finally, a quick thing we're going to have a look at is two key interpretations, overall interpretations, for whether there's more disagreement or agreement within socialism, which should hopefully help you kind of when thinking about the kind of arguments you can make to reach that A star in your socialism essays. So, firstly, looking at the argument that there's more disagreement than agreement, is that on the one hand, it be argued there's major disagreement between socialists, and that revolutionary socialism is unrecognisable from the later strands of social democracy, let alone from the third way. So revolutionary socialism is a radical and black and white ideology that's based in its fundamental rejection of capitalism and the binary class exploitation that it causes. It advocates for complete equality, complete workers' control, and complete collectivism that can only be achieved through revolution. Only through this, it believes, can a true common humanity be reached. So it's a very radical ideology. And social democracy's rejection of revolution and promotion of socialist principles within capitalism should therefore not be seen as an agreement of socialism with revolutionary socialists, as revolutionary socialists believe that socialist principles can't be pursued within capitalism. They're deeply incompatible with them, and that the capitalist state needs to be overthrown. And therefore, in the eyes of revolutionary socialism, social democracy's promotion of collectivism, workers' control, and equality is only partial and entirely undermined by their support for capitalism. Therefore, revolutionary socialists don't see social democracy as socialists at all. And the third way then goes and departs from these socialist principles even further. They not only accept and seek to manage capitalism, they embrace it, whilst rejecting the key socialist principles of equality of outcome, collectivism, and workers' control. It can be argued that they're capitalists, they're not socialists. They are far more aligned with the new right and liberal thought than they are with socialist thought. And socialists, even social democrats, strongly reject the idea that they are socialists at all. On the other hand, it can be argued there's significant agreement within socialism. All socialists share the fundamental belief that society should be reshaped to promote equality, and that capitalism is flawed and requires state intervention to alter it, even if they believe in different extents of this. And they also share a fundamentally optimistic view of human nature and belief in common humanity. There's certainly differences between revolutionary socialism and social democracy, but the latter is driven by the same principles as the former. Even if they're not implemented to such a radical extent, they do support major state intervention in the economy to pursue equality, workers' control, and to tackle class divisions. The third way is clearly hugely different from revolutionary socialism, but it can be seen as an evolution of social democracy, whilst it can also be argued that their significant disagreements with socialism don't suggest that there's major disagreement within socialism, but they reflect the fact that the third way just shouldn't be considered socialist at all. Even if they belong to left-wing parties such as the Labour Party in Britain and the Democrats in the US, they didn't consider themselves socialists, and other socialists definitely don't consider themselves socialists at all. Therefore, the extent to which the third way moves away from the other strands of socialism doesn't reflect the fact that there's major disagreement within socialism, it just reflects the fact that they're a completely different ideology. Okay, so in the final part of this video, we're going to look at the key thinkers of socialism, starting with Marx and Engels, then Beatrice Webb, Rosa Luxemburg, Anthony Crosland, and finally Anthony Giddens. So, starting off with Marx and Engels. So they were pivotal in setting out the foundations of socialist thought, and their collaboration produced some of the most influential texts in political theory, including Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital. And these texts set out the core ideas and principles of socialism, including the critique of capitalism and support for a revolutionary uprising by the proletariat to achieve workers' control and progress to a society that promoted absolute equality, collectivism, and removed class divisions, therefore allowing a common humanity to thrive. Their ideas arose in the context of class divisions and economic inequalities brought about by the rise of industrial capitalism in the 19th century. And their ideas were not only philosophical, they actively sought to promote revolution across Europe with the aim of creating a communist society. So, in the communist society, one of their key quotes is "Workers of the world unite." So, in terms of their key ideas, the first is the centrality of social class, and really important to this is Marx and Engels' dialectic. And to them, the history of society is a history of class struggle, where the oppressor and the oppressed, in a constant opposition, have fought a continuous battle that each time ended either in revolutionary reworking society or in the ruin of the oppressed class. And in the Communist Manifesto, they supported this, writing, "The history of all hitherto society is the history of class struggles." They argue that these class struggles are inevitable and driven by material conditions. And this is their idea of dialectical change. It suggests that an emerging class will always eventually develop and challenge the dominance of an existing class, which will lead to fundamental changes in society. And they see kind of societies inevitably developing from feudalism, which is characterized by the opposition of landowners to serfs and slaves. Out of that grows capitalism and a capitalist class, the bourgeoisie, which ultimately surpasses the feudal class and becomes dominant. This then leads to the capitalist system, where you have the oppression of the proletariat, the working class, by the bourgeoisie. The proletariat becomes more and more exploited and their conditions deteriorate, but as they do so, they increasingly achieve class consciousness. And inevitably, this leads to a revolution, an uprising by the working class, which overthrows the capitalist system and state. This then initially leads to control of all industries in the dictatorship of the proletariat, before the state inevitably withers away and a communist society is established. And this class of stateless and moneyless social order, where all means of production are communally owned and resources, is seen as kind of the end society in that kind of idea of historical materialism and dialectical change. In terms of social class under capitalism, they view it as a binary system of class domination based on the division of labour and capital. So the proletariat is exploited and oppressed by the bourgeoisie. So they see it in very binary terms, the oppression of one class by the other. And this exploitation is central to the capitalist system. And in Das Kapital, they wrote, "Capital is dead labour, that vampire-like only lives by sucking living labour, and lives the more labour it sucks." And that kind of suggests that this exploitation by this kind of capitalist class, which owns the capital, owns the means of production, not only exploits the working class and the workers who don't own the means of production, it increasingly exploits them, which kind of supports this idea of worsening and worsening conditions under capitalism. And they also argue that class conflict is embedded in the state, as the state inherently serves the interests of the bourgeoisie, and as a result, they believe that the existing state needs to be completely removed and capitalism completely removed through a violent revolution. And to do so, they seek to aid the working class in achieving class consciousness, which is an awareness of their collective identity to overcome the false consciousness, which kind of doesn't recognize that they're being exploited. So that you can kind of have the collectivism and workers working together and coming together in a mass revolution to get rid of and replace capitalism. And ultimately, this kind of links into the fact that they believe that kind of this revolution is necessary, that you can only move towards communism and move towards socialism through a revolution. And this kind of first leads to a dictatorship of the proletariat, followed by, as we kind of already looked at, the kind of state eventually withering away and disappearing, and the end goal of a communist society, where you have no class divisions and no state at all. And the next key idea is that humans are social beings. So they believe that humans are naturally sociable and cooperative, but that human nature is also fundamentally shaped by society that surrounds and shapes them. So as a result, under capitalism, society produces a kind of negative human nature with tendencies towards kind of competitiveness rather than cooperation. And as a result, that's the kind of links into their belief that you need to completely change society and change capitalism in order to unleash this kind of positive humanity, positive common humanity, as human nature is very much determined by the society that surrounds it. As a result, they believe in the complete eradication of the capitalist system. The next key thinker we're going to look at is Beatrice Webb, who is a key figure in the promotion of socialism and the founding of the Labour Party in Britain. So along with her husband, Sidney Webb, she co-founded the Fabian Society, which played a key role in the advancement of socialist ideas through gradualist and reformist approaches. She was ultimately an elitist who believed that highly trained socialist technocrats such as herself had a key role to play in bringing about and implementing socialism, moving away from revolutionary socialist ideas of spontaneous working class revolution. First key idea is inevitability of gradualness. She disagreed with revolutionary socialists about the necessity of working class revolution in achieving the overthrow of capitalism and in achieving socialism. She instead supported the idea that it could be achieved through democratic and parliamentary means, which is especially the case when there was a majority of the working class in the electorate, which was the case in Britain after World War I. She believed that kind of due to this kind of working class majority in the electorate, they would inevitably continue to vote for socialist parties, which was natural as they benefit and advocate for the working class. And as a result, the state would be gradually expanded until capitalism was completely abolished and full state control of the economy established. Therefore, she believed that workers' control and the aims of socialism could be achieved peacefully and democratically without the need for revolution. And this kind of links into this idea of expansion of the state. So she really supported the Soviet Union in its model of complete state control of the economy that was managed by kind of enlightened technocrats who would kind of pursue collectivism and distribute resources effectively and pursue absolute equality through rational planning. And she therefore believed that socialism, this links into her belief that socialism should be achieved by extending state control and the gradual takeover of the state by socialists rather than needing the complete overthrow of the state. The next key thinker is Rosa Luxemburg, who was an important revolutionary socialist in the early 20th century, who associated herself with Marxism and strongly opposed revisionism and evolutionary socialism of Webb. Born in Poland and active in Germany, she co-founded the Spartacist League, which later became the Communist Party of Germany. And her fierce criticism of the moderate policies of the Social Democratic Party underscored her commitment to a proletarian working class revolution and the overthrow of capitalism. She believed in the necessity of revolution and the complete overthrow of capitalism, and believed that it needs to be based on the spontaneous grassroots action by the working class. First key idea is the rejection of evolutionary socialism and revisionism. So she strongly rejected these beliefs and saw them as compromising the fundamental goals of socialism and diluting its transformative potential. So she argued that the evolutionary socialism of Beatrice Webb effectively abandoned the class struggle, which she saw as essential for overthrowing capitalism and establishing a truly socialist society. So according to Luxemburg, only a revolution led by the working class could achieve the deep structural changes necessary to eradicate class exploitation and inequality, and therefore she kind of had a very radical and uncompromising revolutionary form of socialism. She argued that Webb's strategy of gradual reform within capitalist structures would only reinforce these structures rather than dismantle them, as capitalism is inherent, class exploitation, is inherent to capitalism, and capitalism therefore needs to be completely overthrown in one go. And she also rejected Lenin's idea of a tightly organised vanguard leading a revolution. She argued that true socialism had to be democratic, and the true revolution had to be kind of directly emanate from the proletariat rather than from the elites. And this links into her key belief in struggle by the proletariat for reform and democracy. And she really emphasised the role of trade unionism and other forms of working class organisation in overcoming false consciousness and fostering a true class consciousness that would lead to a revolution. And she believed that through trade unionism and political activism, the working class become aware of their collective power and the inherent injustices of the capitalist system, and that's crucial in rallying them towards revolution. So she wrote, "The working class in every country only learned to fight in the course of their struggles." She therefore agreed with Marx and Engels in her support for a form of revolution that was deeply rooted in the spontaneous and direct action of the working class. So she emphasised mass strikes, political demonstrations, and the mobilisation of trade unions as the primary vehicles for change, as they were kind of led and driven by the workers themselves. And she believes that kind of rather than elites trying to carry out a revolution themselves, as Lenin did, she focused on empowering workers to both lead and carry out the revolution. And that would ensure there's a truly transformative socialist revolution. Anthony Crosland is the next thinker, and he's the key social democratic thinker. He was pivotal in the founding of social democracy and the reshaping of the Labour Party in Britain. So he significantly influenced the ideological direction of the party with The Future of Socialism, which was his key work, that advocated for a form of socialism that was compatible with capitalism and for a mixed economy, rather than strict adherence to Marxism, as revolutionary socialists argued for. So he argued that socialism should focus on spreading equality of opportunity rather than absolute equality, and that capitalism could be managed to prevent its destructive effects. So the real shift from the more dogmatic approaches of earlier socialists. And he famously stated Marx has little or nothing to offer the contemporary socialists, kind of underscoring this view. So the first key idea he believed was socialism within a capitalist framework. So he believed that capitalism, so he very much agreed with the socialist belief that capitalism creates inequalities and is a flawed system, but he believes that it can be managed to pursue equality, which is arguably the key goal of socialism. And his belief is rooted effectively in Keynesianism and the ability of Keynesian economic management to prevent mass unemployment, whilst taxation on the rich could be used to pursue some redistribution and therefore some equality of outcome. So Keynesianism involves government intervention in the economy, especially in times of downturns or recessions, to stimulate demand and maintain full employment. So it kind of provides a framework for using fiscal and monetary policy to mitigate the booms and busts of capitalism, prevent unemployment, and promote stable growth. And partly driven by the decline of traditional industries, Crosland believed that class under capitalism could no longer be understood in strictly binary terms, like revolutionary socialists did, and Marx in particular. So revolutionary socialists believed that the kind of society was defined by binary oppression of one group by the other, of the proletariat by the bourgeoisie. And he believed that actually, when he was writing, it's a more complex system, when new social classes like the middle class, managerial class, professional classes were present, and capitalism is kind of less oppressive and less kind of seen as this in this kind of binary, in terms of this binary oppression. And given this shift, he argued that socialism should no longer focus on absolute equality from one class to the other, or dismantling capitalism. Instead, it should be focused on providing equality of opportunity for everyone in society, whilst using some taxation to pursue some redistribution and equality of outcome. And you saw this in his introduction of comprehensive education as Secretary of State, which aimed to kind of level the playing field by providing an equal, good level of education to everyone in society. And crucially, he believed in state-managed capitalism. He didn't believe in just leaving capitalism alone. He believed the state should play a key role in managing it. And that's the kind of first off with kind of Keynesianism, and we talked about, but also really important is the idea of a mixed economy, where key industries are nationalised and therefore run in the interest of everyone, reflecting the kind of socialist belief in collectivism. There's also significant spending on welfare to kind of pursue equality of opportunity and provide a basic safety net, but the remainder of the economy is capitalist. That's why it's mixed. It kind of have these kind of key state-run industries, and the rest is capitalist. And this kind of aim to combine the efficiency and innovation of the market with state intervention to prevent the worst effects of capitalism and ensure that kind of key parts of the economy are run in the interests of the whole of society. And also key to the kind of state-managed capitalism is the idea of universal social welfare, where kind of welfare programs and services are available to all citizens regardless of income or status, to ensure a basic standard of living and social protection for everyone in society, and progressive taxation to redistribute wealth from the rich to the poor somewhat is necessary to facilitate this. The final key thinker we're going to have a look at is Anthony Giddens, who belongs to the Third Way. And he was a kind of key intellectual basis for the Third Way. So he was a key prominent sociologist, member of the Labour Party, and he really influenced the kind of shift in the Labour Party in this period. So he proposed that the left should embrace globalisation, technological innovation, and flexible labour markets, with the state's role being to provide a safety net and promote individual empowerment and equality of opportunity rather than extensive economic control. And as a result, kind of advocated for the reason it's called a third way is to kind of to kind of go in between and find a way to combine social democracy and free market capitalism. Crucially, he rejected state intervention. He didn't view capitalism as fundamentally flawed and requiring radical overhaul. Instead, he saw it as an effective means of generating wealth and promoting efficiency. And he argued that in the globalized, technologically advanced economy, traditional models of kind of top-down state control and state management, such as Keynesianism, were no longer effective, and they kind of produce inefficiencies rather than effectively managing the economy. And as a result, he favoured privatisation, as he believed that competitive markets would more effectively meet consumer needs and drive innovation rather than state management of key industries. He also supported a key kind of change role for the state, arguing that it shouldn't focus on collective wealth or redistribution. Instead, it should seek to empower individuals within the competitive, modernised, globalised economy. So it's kind of more individual focus and individual empowerment rather than kind of collectivism and redistribution. And he argued that kind of empowered individuals and this state should empower individuals and give them responsibility rather than creating a culture of dependency. Therefore, kind of really leaning into kind of liberal ideas and even some kind of new right conservative ideas. So instead of investing a large welfare state, the state should use tax generated from economic growth in society to invest in society's infrastructure and create equal opportunity so that there are really good opportunities for everyone in society. You see that in investment in education and training in particular. So he therefore combined a commitment to equality of opportunity and saw kind of education as a key vehicle to empower individuals in society, with kind of promotion of equal access to education for all, regardless of background. This is combined with a strong welfare state. And finally, a key belief was the kind of community over class conflict. So he definitely didn't believe that society should be interpreted as a binary struggle between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. He said it was far more complicated, and kind of states, rather than kind of analysing society in this way, the focus should be on fostering a sense of community and shared future among all members of society. Especially that in the modern globalised world, he believed that the kind of capitalist system and society was no longer defined by this binary oppression. Instead, there were lots of different measures of lots of different distinctions and social stratifications, including kind of gender, ethnicity, and age. And kind of therefore, instead of kind of focusing on pitting one class against the other and promoting the working class, we should kind of really focus on social cohesion and collective identity and community that transcends class lines. So yeah, that's pretty much everything for this video. Sorry it's so long, but kind of the idea is to go through everything you need to know. The PDFs you've been seeing in the video, you can find on the Politics Explained website to purchase if you want to use them in your revision, where you can also find lots of essay plans and other resources to help you in your A-level, including 12 core ideologies essay plans. So that's for socialism, liberalism and conservatism on society, state, economy and human nature. And they're really, really detailed and should hopefully help you in your revision. So yeah, let me know if you've got any questions in the comments below, and I'll get back to you. And yeah, see you in the next video.